Well, I was looking at the first part of this video, and that's all I intended to do, that I recorded the other day about this thing, the Dramatica Mobius Toroid. And I described it as the first visualization we ever did about the Dramatica model of narrative psychology, the Dramatica theory of story made manifest. Well, as it turns out, that's all correct. Everything I said in there was good. But in reviewing the tape, I realized there were a couple of interesting things about it I'd like to share with you also. So here we go. Here's the additional things. This model has space and time included, as Dramatica does, the Dramatica theory of story, space and time included, meaning that unlike trigonometry, you can't go around and around a cycle over time because time is a component, so it has to change as well. So we often thought that we should come up with quadranometry to handle that fourth dimension. Naturally, in 3 dimensions, you can't actually put the fourth dimension into it, and this is a fourth dimensional model because it says that time and space are not connected in narrative. There's no space-time continuum. We tend to blend things together, and sometimes it's space and time, and sometimes it's things like desire and ability to make desirability. Check out the Dramatica theory to learn more about that. But the main key is that you need both space and time represented in the model so that you can accommodate such things as a slap followed by a scream, ah, is different than a scream, ah, followed by a snap. Okay? In the first case, someone is slapped and they scream from the pain. In the second case, someone is hysterical, perhaps, and they're slapped to bring them to their senses. The same 2 things put in a different order have a different meaning. And I first came up with that concept as a film editor before we worked on Dramatica, when I was working in the film biz for a decade or so. And at that time, I realized if I had 2 shots hanging in my trim bin, I could move them from one place to another, change them around, and the meaning altered completely. So it turns out that that thing I observed is just a small part of the Dramatica theory, which is that space and time have meaning, but how they're connected creates that meaning, and they don't have to be connected the same way. Things don't always have to happen in the same sequence. So this model here incorporates that by having the toroid part, this hula hoop, as it were. This represents space in the model. And these lines that wrap around it in a helical pattern, these lines represent the flow of time. Now, it's a lot like DNA. This is, in fact, the DNA of narrative psychology. DNA is not just good for biology, it's also good for psychology, and we've mapped it out in the Dramatica theory. We call it mental relativity, because some of the equations that are used to describe it are the same ones that you use to describe, for example, actual relativity in the physical world, according to Einstein. So there is a comparison and a reason why we call it mental relativity. But this thing here, these lines have all the different names, the element names that you find in the Dramatica table of story elements, narrative elements. Okay, and they wrap around with 4 different colors because each time it goes wrapping around, which is, as you see, 4 times, you can see the yellow up here, and you can see the yellow over there, and you can see the yellow down here, and you can see the yellow over here. So that means that the quad concept of space-time, mass, and energy, or inside the mind, knowledge, thought, ability, and desire, all that is maintained. But there's a quad of quads, and that quad of quads is represented by the 4 colors. So each one creates a quad on the outside, green to green to green to green down here, and the blue and the red and the yellow. And when it completes one cycle, it connects seamlessly to the next one, which is how the mind works. It goes up and down the helix. You can go to small levels of detail. You can go all the way up to the highest level of detail, but we only have a certain bandwidth of mind, which consists of the size of mind constant. You can't expand your mind beyond a certain number of dimensions. There's 4 external dimensions and 4 internal dimensions: mass, energy, space, and time, knowledge, thought, ability, and desire. The external and internal dimensions that we have to work with, and we have to stand on one of them in order to see the other 7. So constantly we're moving around from one place to another to stand on a different one of those 8. alternating between looking outside in mass, energy, space, time, and inside in knowledge, thought, ability, desire, to compare the two, find the differential, look for the dissonance, and look where they agree, where they conform. And then at that point, you can determine whether there's a problem and where you think it resides, and therefore how to start looking for the solution to that problem. Isn't this magical? It's like one of those, the magic mirror of Dramatica. What does that make me as a character in Disney? Kind of afraid to ask. Well, anyway, I'm going to put that down for a second so I can continue talking about this. So the helices that go around it, the 4 helices, those are 4 trips around, which makes a quad of time. Because once you spin around once, you go... Take a slinky, for example. You look at a slinky and you stretch it out. From the side, it looks like a sine wave. Okay. From the end, it looks like a circle. Now, that's typical trigonometry when you're plotting it out. You can look at a sine wave going along, being plotted against time, or you can look at it as doing circles from the end and say it's 270 degrees, 360 degrees, and 450, whatever. Anyway, you can work that out. But there are 2 perspectives. One of them is the spatial perspective, where you're looking at something that's going around the same space over and over. And the other one's the temporal perspective, where you're looking at it plot out as time plays. So you look at space and you look at time, and you can see one or the other in trigonometry. But in the Dramatica model, we have to see them both at the same time in the same place. All right, so how do we do that? Well, this model was the first visualization. We ended up with a tower later, which kind of ignores the temporal component and just shows you the spatial relationships as if it's a hierarchy from the top down. This is valuable because it shows you the flow. It shows you the sequence. It shows you how things move around and how space and time are connected. Okay, think now of a coil wrapped around a toroid, what that does in physics. It's left and right reversed here, so I'm like, oh, where am I? Okay. Anyway, each of these has a little name on it. I think you can see there's one name. Okay, and here's more names. Yeah, sort of. Anyway, everything is an element, and so you can get 4 elements like that to create a quad, and if you flip it over, you can do the same thing on the other side. This is not supposed to just be 4 helices that once they go all around, they connect to the other one and start over. That's a closed system. That's the spatial view. What it should be, if it's a visualization, is that it's a Mobius strip wrapped 4 times around a toroid. Now, the problem is, if you actually try to do that in this 3-dimensional world, again, you've only got 7 things you can look at. 4 external dimensions, 4 internal dimensions. You have to stand on one. Something's got to suffer. So in this model, what suffers? That you're not able to actually incorporate, or you'd have no place to stand to look at it, no perspective, no point of view. Well, it's the fact that it doesn't actually connect and flip over like a Mobius strip was. As you know, with a Mobius strip, you create a loop and then you simply twist like that, and then you start at the top, and when you go all the way around, you end up underneath where you started. That's how a Mobius strip works, and that's how this is supposed to work, is by the time you go through all 4 of them, you end up upside down to where you started, and that completes one total exploration of a psychological issue at a particular level of resolution. All right, that's good. Now, the problem is that you can't actually flip it without creating a wrinkle in the model here. I mean, you try to flip it. That's effectively an imaginary number. It's not an imaginary number in the theory, but it's an imaginary number when you try to put it into the real world, real number system, which is what this represents. Then you kind of have to just go with it without flipping it. And suddenly the real relationship in terms of relativity of how these things work between space and time is lost, because now it looks like time is dependent upon space because it doesn't twist, and space is not at all dependent upon time. It's just a platform on which time plays itself out, comparing what was to what is to what might be, drawing a line through it, seeing the progress along the line. Okay, what was, what is, what might be, the 3 ghosts in Scrooge's A Christmas Carol, but there's a 4th ghost that nobody thinks of as a ghost, which is Marley, and he talks about progress, and there you end up with your quad. Ghost of Christmas Past, Ghost of Christmas Present, Ghost of Christmas Future, and progress, and together all 4 of them make up a quad. Everything needs to be a quad because 4 dimensions inside, 4 dimensions outside. Okay, now we have this and we can't flip it because it'll make a wrinkle. And when we're thinking in the external world, we tend to just accept that and say it's an imaginary number, okay? And so the square root of -1. I wrote something the other day. I said, how about the square root of negative friend? That's an imaginary friend. Well, anyway, don't mind the airplanes. I don't. If you can hear them, I'm sorry. If you hear the sirens, I'm sorry. If you can hear the person doing grass, I'm sorry. I don't have a professional studio. I've got my desk in the house and my desk in my storage room filled with 48 boxes, 50 boxes of all the memorabilia and creative stuff I've built up over all my 72 years on the planet. And I'm going through the boxes now one by one, and this is the first thing I found. So I made that my talk on part one. Now, to continue with part two, so this is an inaccurate model. It's inaccurate insofar as it looks like space is the driver, time wraps around space, and that they connect in a space-time continuum. Continuum, why? Because it just keeps going endlessly in a loop all the way around, like a slinky, okay? But it's not really a continuum. If you do the flip with the Mobius strip, then you find out you go through the whole thing on the other side, and it oscillates from one direction to the other, and well, that's for another discussion. I just wanted to talk about this object and let you know that that's a little bit more about what's going on here, is that it's the best three-dimensional slice of a four-dimensional concept we could come up with initially, but it's completely impractical. Impractical because there's no way to do anything with it. And that's when Chris came up. Chris Huntley, my co-creator of Dramatica along with me. Well, if we're along with each other, we're both co-creators. It's not along with anybody. Anyway, Chris came up with the concept of the four towers, and then the squashed version of it, when all the towers collapse down to the lower level with the elements. That's the periodic table of story elements, and it has families just like the noble gases and the rare earths. You can find them on it, and unlike the periodic table of elements, this also holds that extra dimension as best we can in there, so that you can do things you can't do with chemistry. I guess it would be more like organic chemistry. You can't really predict it using standard chemical analysis techniques and projections. Anyway, so that's what this is. That's the part two of the Dramatica Mobius donut, and that's why I call it Mobius, because it's supposed to have that flip in it. Anyway, a lot of deep theory in there. I mean, I've talked with a lot of people who follow Dramatica, and we talk about these issues endlessly, but I don't want to do that here, even though every minute is good for my channel if you keep on watching. But if I talk anymore, you'll probably stop right there. Okay, so we're going to draw this to a close. But now that I'm retired, I'm doing things like this. I'm talking about theory not in a let's sell Dramatica way, but in terms of theory in not let's prove that this is the right way. I don't care anymore. I'm 72. I just want to share what I know. It'll do some good, won't do some good. So this is what I shared today. I'll be back again to share some more stuff next time, maybe about little tiny specifics of how the current Dramatica software works, which you can find at Dramatica.com. It's online. It's now enabled by AI, enabled with Frontier AI, so that you don't have to learn the theory unless you want to. And if you do know it, it's even better. But you can just do sort of like a chat format that you're familiar with the chat engines, only it's been trained completely in the Dramatica theory, and it will read your story if you want, put in the text, or you tell it your story, or write it, or do it verbally and enter it, and it will take that information and be able to analyze it and say, here's your main character, here's what happens in Act 1, 2, and 3, or ought to, here's where you're diverging from the structure you seem to be building. You have total control, but it will give you feedback, and it will also tell you where you might want to go next, a bunch of suggestions. Really good, Dramatica.com. But there's one more thing. How much would you pay now? But wait, there's more, okay? What's more is that after I've retired, I was finally able to pursue my own personal interest. Dramatica, that was an intellectual journey, and figuring out the theory and developing it for a third of a century now and teaching it has been completely satisfying as a career. But it's not my passion, not where I get my fulfillment. That goes back more than half a century to when I was like 10 years old. My dad got a piano, and I started playing the piano, and nobody knew I was doing it. My mom came in from the other room to tell my dad that that's a very nice song you're doing, and she saw me playing it. Okay, so that's the first time I knew I had any musical lean at all. And since then, I've actually composed more than 500 songs, including some riffs and melody lines and other stuff, but 500 that every time I created one, starting in 1969, I'd written them before, but I started recording them in 1969, and I recorded a demo of every one of those 500 songs. But it's always been my angst that I'm not a good enough pianist, a good enough guitar player. I'm doing Dramatica. I don't have time to be a professional musician. And multi-tracking technology, I tried that. I made some things that sounded pretty good, indicated, but they're more like demos at best. Okay, all demos. But now comes AI, Suno particularly. And I discovered as soon as they upgraded to where you couldn't just make music on it by prompting, but where you could upload your demos and then it would perform them as if it was studio musicians doing their damnedest to make you sound good. Well, I started doing that. And I've already done all 500 of them one time. And now I'm going back to say, well, what would this one that's kind of a little ditty sound like if it was a full orchestral score for a motion picture? What would it sound like if it was in African rhythms? How about reggae? Okay, and one a day, maybe two a day, sometimes maybe 4 or 5 if I'm really into it. I make these songs. So I tell you this because from now on, for me, my post-retirement life, after the end of every single one of my videos for Dramatica, or probably anything else, I'm going to do a segment where I play you one of my songs. Okay, so I don't know which one I'm going to put on right now, but as soon as I finish here, which will be, come on, move it, very soon, I will attach one of my songs and you can listen to it. And if you want to hear all of my music, you can go to my YouTube channel, which is Tarnished Karma, and I'll put links to both Dramatica.com and Tarnished Karma on YouTube in the description below. So here you go. Get ready. New music. My original song from the 1970s in this case. I'm going to pick one of those. And it will play for you as performed by Suno in 3, 2, 1.
Clock on my phone says Tuesday. Radio swears it's 64. in a cave.